All right, folks, we'll get rolling again so we can get you on your way here today. So one thing, we've had lots of discussion already here, lots of questions about multi-species mixing, okay? And I know there's many of you in the room that are growing multi-species mixes. I'm not going to tell you not to grow multi-species mixes. That's not why I'm here today, and that's not my message. What I will tell you is what I've learned from our own studies and from the studies of others. There's a big discussion about multi-species mixes because in like regen ag and some of these programs, there's a lot of talk about crop diversity and incentives around crop diversity and that sort of thing. There has been some studies in some places that have talked about benefits of crop diversity. However, from the work that we've done here in PEI, I haven't seen any evidence that the ultra-diverse mixes have any real tangible improvement in yield or soil health. My proviso to that is, my studies are over 2-3 years, not over 10 or 12. But that is generally what we've been seeing. We haven't been seeing a big bump in yield or a big bump in any of the metrics on soil health from these, what I would call 8, 10, 13 species mixes. Going along with that, there's been a couple of new, like what they call meta-analysis. So this is like studies of studies in North America, where they've taken all these different studies that people have done on multi-species mixes versus 1 or 2 species crops. And again, they don't really see any tangible, repeated value of those multi-species mixes over a really good single species or say 2 species mix, okay? Again, if you are growing a multi-species mix and you are having success with it and you're seeing your soil organic matters going up and you're seeing your potato yields going up, by all means continue doing it. I'm not here to tell you to stop doing it. If that's working for you, that's awesome, drive on. There are some mixtures that, like all mixtures are different, right? Because it depends on what's in them. Some mixtures that get marketed are a bunch of oats, a bit of legumes, and then a few other flowers and things in them to kind of make them look pretty and attract some bees. Some mixes are very well oriented towards, you know, these are complementary to these, none of these are going to be weed issues, these fight these diseases. And again, I got no issues with that if that's something that's working for you, okay? And especially if that mix has got mustard and buckwheat and things in it that's helping you with wireworm, but you're also filling in the mustard and the buckwheat with a few other things that carry along with it, organic matter stuff, again, that's fine. I got no problem with that. I just want you to be aware that in some of the work that we've done, a more limited mixture that's more tailored to your needs may have the same or better value and may come at a little less cost, right? And you may get more of what you want in the field. So I got a little bit more about that in a second. The other thing to note is, again, it depends on where you're getting it from, it depends on what it is. Some ultra-diverse mixes in PEI that have been used in the last 10 years have introduced weeds. And they've introduced weeds that we didn't normally have and that are buggers to get rid of. So in East Prince, there's been a lot of mugwort introduced, and most of it we think came through one of these multi-species mixes, and now it's in some fields there's a lot of it. There was some mugwort in one of my fields at home this year, and we didn't use any mix, but I'm pretty sure it came in from the ditch. So there was some mugwort in the ditch, and I think it came in from the ditch. And my brother said, how are we gonna manage that? Spray Roundup on this or whatever? And it was probably 100 or 200 plants in the field. I said, you know that young fellow that milks cows for us on the weekends? Get him out here on Saturday with a shovel and pick all those plants out of this field. And that was the best money we spent last year probably. So that's how you manage mugwort, because mugwort is rhizomous and it spreads under the soil and spreads by seed and rhizome. So it's a difficult one, and you got to get not just the plant but the rhizomes of the plant. Yellow nutsedge. There's reports of yellow nutsedge in one field in PEI. That has not necessarily been here before. That also spreads by rhizomes. I've seen it, I've seen pictures of it, put a rhizome right through a potato. Worse than cooch. So that's one we need to keep out of here. And if we find it, manage it, right? So, and there's other weeds we don't have that if we get them, we're not going to be happy. Water hemp, you know, other things. So yeah, those are things that we need to keep an eye on, okay? That comes down to knowing where your seed comes from and being comfortable with it, and is it certified, all that sort of stuff. Next slide. This is a trial that we did with Aaron Mills at AFC in Charlottetown, and this was a multi-year trial. So the way this trial was set up, and if you've been to Harrington in the last number of years, there's a long-term rotation trial on the south side of the road that's in 9 blocks, and it's been going for like 20 years now. It's been potatoes now for I think 3 rotations. And so the trial was, we were comparing after potatoes, all the plots every 3 years would be potatoes, but then we had barley as the main cash crop, buckwheat and mustard as a wireworm suppressive crop, and then pea as a cash crop, okay? That would be in the second year. And then in the third year, we were comparing just a 2-species mix of Sudan grass and pearl millet, targeted for organic matter and nematode control. Then a custom mix, which I advised Aaron on, which was Sudan grass, pearl millet, fava bean, buckwheat, and mustard. And then we had a commercial 13-species mix that came from a supplier. And basically what you can see is no difference. No difference in yield. And this is not just 1 year, this is the average of 3 years for each of these trials, right? So there'd be 3 reps each year times 3 years. So each of these bars would represent 9 reps. And basically no difference. The only one that's a little bit higher is that one that's 442. That's the buckwheat mustard custom mix. That one, I think it's because that one had the most amount of wireworm, or most amount of buckwheat and mustard in it, and it was helping to control the wireworms, with less wireworm damage. I think that's what that was more about. The rest of them are all more or less the same. When we look at the soil health metrics, I don't have that here, the soil health metrics were all the same too. There was really no significant differences. So again, there may be benefits to diversity in your mix, but make sure that diversity is working for you. Make sure you're not paying for something that doesn't grow. Make sure you're paying for something that has that fits your system, that isn't going to become a volunteer problem, that isn't going to be hard to kill. Make sure there are species that mature at similar times. I know that's been an issue with sometimes, like if you have a lot of buckwheat in a mix and it all goes to seed in 50 days and everything else isn't even ready to mow yet, that can be a challenge too, right? So just about finding that balance. Next slide. Oh, yeah, sorry, just go back. Any other questions about mixes? As I said, I don't want to come off as saying, you know, what you're doing is wrong or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to give you the data that I have and make sure that what is in your mix is complementary to your system, okay? Don't pay for having sunflower in a mix if you have 1 sunflower per acre that show up in the field. Don't pay for a mix that's got species in it that aren't suited for PEI. Now, some of those mixes are getting better, but like, I don't know, when I first started in this job, and a few guys, they were just starting to use some of these multi-species mixes, and one of them had sun hemp in it. Sun hemp doesn't grow on PEI, not really. So you're paying money for something that's not going to grow. You know, make sure what's in your mix is complementary to your system and is going to be good for you. And if that means the mix has got 5 things in it that you really want, as opposed to 10 or 13 things in it, I don't think you're going behind. And I mean, we talk about mixtures, almost all the forages we plant, we rarely plant a single species there, right? Like we're planting alfalfa, we're planting alfalfa plus 2 or 3 grasses. We're planting clover plus 2 or 3 grasses. Where it might even, like my place, if I'm growing a hay mix, my main hay mix at home's got alfalfa, Sonia white clover, and 3 or 4 grasses in it. So that's a multi-species mix, it's just it's targeted towards forage, right? Any other questions? Red clover, again, we've talked about this before a little bit. All these reasons on the left is all why we've been growing all kinds of red clover here for 100 and some years, with valid reason, right? Very cost-effective forage option. Can be frost seeded. Establishes reliably a lot of the time. Large biomass with minimal fertility. Does produce a nitrogen credit. Relatively easy to terminate. Excellent forage for beef cattle. Grows better on low pH soils than alfalfa does, and other legumes. Those are all valid reasons. We've learned about the cons a little more in the last 10 years, and that is that they're generally associated with higher levels of verticillium and nematodes. In literature, I can also find associations with common scab with red clover. It breaks down faster than alfalfa. Angus, you mentioned this before. So it breaks down faster in the fall than alfalfa. So you have a higher likelihood of fall nitrate leaching if you're not putting a cover crop in with it after termination. And if you cut it late, so again, you talked about, well, we're not going to go cut it till July or whatever. You got a whole bunch of stalks, and it doesn't make great feed. And I mean, it's a lot of bulk biomass, but the cows sift through it, and they don't really like eating it and whatever else. So, you know, dairy guys won't touch it most of the time. So depending on where your market is. If you're looking at, you want clovers, you want maybe an annual clover, you want something a little different, there are other options, okay? So there's like crimson clover or berseem clover. Some of you guys with multi-species mixes, an annual mix will have some of those in them. And berseem clover and crimson clover can give a decent nitrogen credit, like a 30, 40 pound an acre nitrogen credit, right? At a decent amount. Not at 10% of the mix, but at a, you know, half the mix or something. I never say never on lots of crops. Do you have fields that don't have a vert issue, don't have high verticillium nematodes? Because the varieties that you've grown don't tend to have issues with early dying. They're more vert resistant. Maybe red clover worked fine for you. You know, like there are varieties out there that, you know, especially some of the newer ones we're growing for Cavendish, some of the other newer varieties that are coming from other programs that don't multiply verticillium as much. And they don't get early dying. So if a plant doesn't get early dying as much, is more resistant to early dying because it's more resistant to the verticillium, that means it's seeding less verticillium back into the ground after you harvest it. So the amount of load of verticillium in the soil will naturally go down over time because you're not continually bumping it up all the time. So again, in those systems, maybe red clover or some clover is an option for you. Same with low pH land, that might be an option. Where, you know, alfalfa's not going to fit, so clover does. Maybe you want to grow clover, but just back off the amount of it in the mix. Bump the grasses up a bit, or maybe a different, like maybe it's alside clover, or maybe it's white clover, or something like that. If you're doing any of these clovers, I recommend termination early and doing your cover crop where possible. This year was not as possible to do that because of the dry weather. But where possible, early termination and a cover crop to carry over as much of your nitrogen as you can and for soil erosion. However, if that's not what you can do, not what you have equipment for, or the year conspires against you, terminate it as late as possible. In colder soils will not mineralize the nitrogen and it'll carry more of it over to the next year. So you have less nitrogen loss in those cases. For any of this stuff around rotations, if you want to play around with it on your own a little bit, or you want to work with your agronomist on it or something like that, Ag Canada developed a crop rotation calculator in the Last Living Labs, and it's on the agronomy site. And it comes with a little how-to guide, and it comes actually with a couple of videos on how to use it as well. And you can plug in different crops next to each other, and it's all got the economics of them built in. So it's got like all the cost of production all built into it. And then you can also change any of those variables if you want to. You say, well, my cost of production for this is not that, and I want to change it. You can do that. And you can put in what your expected yields are, your yield goals are, and that sort of thing, and put them in there. And you can compare rotations. You can also use this calculator to compare different lengths of rotations. So you can compare a 2-year to a 3-year, or a 3-year to a 4-year, or that sort of thing. So, and it'll do the economics of it. So that's something you can play around with. One thing I always say, please just go back there for a second, honey. If you want to experiment with rotation crops, Don't plant 1,000 acres for the first time. Don't plant 500 acres for the first time. Like, try it out on a couple fields and see if you like it, and then go whole hog. Like, you know, make sure it works for you before you commit to it, right? You guys know that, but I know there's some people have gone heavy on one thing, and then maybe, oh, that didn't work so well for me, so then they got to back out of that. So.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking with the alfalfa, Ryan, like one of the things that I learned at my farm is it's twofold. Yes, pH is important, big time. Also, your potash
Yep.
credits in your soil tests. Like I found out my cropping system was taking out more potash than I was putting back in, and alfalfa does not look good in a low potash soil. So
yeah.
if you're thinking about doing alfalfa, it is an expensive route to take. I believe too that it's worth the expense. So give yourself your best opportunity and put it in some of your better soils.
My rough figure, if you're going to grow alfalfa and get a good crop alfalfa on it, you'd want to have a pH, or sorry, a soil test for potash of about 150 or higher. Now, if you're just mowing it, you're gonna put potash on, it's still gonna be there. It doesn't go away. So it's gonna be cycled and be there for your potato crop too, right? But, you know, if you got your K's coming back on your soil test at less than 100, the alfalfa's gonna struggle more because alfalfa likes potash, especially if you sell a crop of it on. So, just, I would agree with Scott on that. Next slide. So, transitioning more into cover crops. So what we grow after we harvest something else, or what we're going to grow with, you know, before, like after terminating forage or something like that. Why do we do it? Well, these are all the reasons. Number one reason, prevent soil erosion. Number two reason, prevent soil erosion. Number three reason, prevent soil erosion. That is the number one reason to use cover crops, and everything else is a bonus. But in our erodible sandy loam soils here in PEI, as much as we can keep the ground covered, green where possible, it's going to be good for you for the long term. You're going to keep soil in your field, you're going to keep your fields productive, you're going to keep the neighbors happy, you're going to keep the soil out of the rivers, and it's going to, you know, set you up for continued profitability in those fields going forward. The top layer of soil is where most of the organic matter is. It's where most of your soil nutrients are. We lose it, we lose all the productivity out of the soil. You know that from your eroded knolls in your field always do poorer than the rest of the field, right? So, and that's why some people don't even plant those knolls anymore, right? Next slide, please. We want to avoid scenes like this. So that's a field where, you know, the right side of the field didn't have a cover in the fall after potatoes, and the left side did. Even though that cover's now dead in the spring, and, you know, it just was like a barley or oats, it was enough to hold the soil. It was enough to put some roots in the ground and keep it from running, whereas the other side we got this real erosion. Next slide. That was this winter. That was Christmas time. You know, after all the snow came off the fields and then we got a big wind, like that snert is it's heartbreaking, you know. And that's not even a big field on the side. That was a field that was potatoes. It's about a 10-acre field, 15-acre field. There's woods in behind it, and even so, geez, it just blew dirt all over that road for 2 days. So avoid those situations. Those are costly. It's hard to put a dollar figure to that, but that's all kinds of potential value of your land capital blowing across the road. Additionally, we can use cover crops to reduce nitrogen losses. So in two different ways. Denitrification, which is loss of nitrogen to the atmosphere. It doesn't end up being that much nitrogen that you lose, but it has a big impact on the environment. So we only lose, I learned at the Federation meetings there last week, that for every 100 pounds of nitrogen you put on, you might lose 1 pound of nitrogen to nitrous oxide. That doesn't seem like a big deal. It's a huge deal to the environment, right? So anything we can do to minimize that, because nitrous oxide has 300 times the greenhouse gas impact as a molecule of carbon dioxide. So anything we can do to decrease that is good. But also, in PEI, we lose a lot through nitrate leaching. So any leftover nitrogen at the end of the season, if there's nothing to take it up, and we get big rains in November and December, just goes through the soil profile. Just takes it, water grabs it, zoop, and it's gone. And it's not going to get carried over to the next year. So we found in some of our living lab studies that the covers did do a good job at carrying over more of that nitrogen to the next year. It soaks it up, it puts it into an organic form, and it's going to carry it over to the next year. Next slide. Okay. Building soil carbon with cover crops. This is tricky because a lot of my work has been 1 or 2 year studies, and it's, as Chad rightly mentioned there before, it's really hard to show organic matter building in the short term. In the Living Labs project, where I compared in 1 year where we had soil organic matter, where we had a fall cover versus no fall cover, that soil organic matter increased by about 0.1. I think that number's too high, and I think it might be more that it stayed the same and it went down in the no cover crop because of erosion. So it may be more about conserving than building. But Laura Van Eert at Ridgetown, she did an 8-year study, 2 full rotations. So Ridgetown's down in the south, Essex County or so, Lambton County, and their rotation was field tomatoes, which would be similar to in land management to potatoes, then grain corn, then soybeans, then winter wheat. So in that rotation, they had 3 out of those 4 years, all the years except the grain corn, they would have a cover crop versus alongside it the same rotation with no cover crop. And over 8 years, they saw 0.2 to 0.4 organic matter improvement, depending on the cover crop. So where they used fall rye, it was the 0.4, because that stays green all winter and stays green into the spring. Where they had like radish and oats, it was more like the 0.2, 0.25. But that's still good. Would most of you guys take a 0.2 to 0.4 increase in organic matter in 8 years? 100%, right? Like that's great, that's huge. Taking a field from 2.5 to 2.9 or something like that, that's huge in terms of water holding potential for fields here. So building organic matter takes time. In all the studies that I've seen, it's less about what it is. It's less about the species. It's more about how much of it there is. So the more you can do to maximize biomass above ground and below ground, and whatever you can do to minimize tillage is going to be associated with building organic matter. Those are the 2 big things, right? So you can have all the biomass in the world. If you do a whole bunch of plowing and a whole bunch of tillage to put it in, you burn off as much or more organic matter than you just put in. But if you can reduce tillage where possible, and I know we grow potatoes, and that requires soil disturbance, and that requires tillage. So yes, we're not doing no potatoes in here, but in the non-potato years, where there's opportunities of reducing tillage, in the potato rotation, is there the place where I can cut 1 pass out of it or something like that, minimize tillage where possible? That's worth investigating. Next, weed suppression. I think I've showed this picture before. It isn't every time, but like this was a trial. This is from Emerald area. Left side was tillage radish in the fall after wheat. Right side is no cover. All kinds of hooch and barnyard grass and stuff over here, very little on the other side. Some of these cover crops can do a good job at suppressing weeds if they get a good cover. If they're planted early and get a good cover on the ground. Crops like fall rye and buckwheat also, beyond just having a good stand, they release chemicals in their roots in a process we call alleliopathy, which directly diminishes and reduces weed growth. So it makes everything growing around them less competitive. It's a natural defense they have. So that's why people often say fall rye is like the best non-herbicide you can use, Next. we've already talked about this a bit. You guys are more in wireworm country down here than anywhere else on the island, and many of you are already growing buckwheat or mustard in some way to control wireworm. I'm here to tell you, it does work. It does work, and it works without being incorporated. You know, you can just grow it as a crop, and it'll do something. You can grow it in a mix, and it'll do something. Ag Canada did work. Buckwheat grown at 30 to 40% of a mix had the same impact on reducing wireworm as if it was 100%. So if you don't want to have a whole field of buckwheat and you want to put it in a mix, it helps. Now, it doesn't clear it out, you know, it doesn't diminish your wireworm population to nothing, but repeated studies here have shown that both of these crops do help reduce wireworm populations and reduce damage in your potato crop. So if you're struggling with wireworm in a field, even with the use of Symegra, I would consider slotting one of these in before potatoes.
Symegra does not stay in the soil for the whole season.
Yep.
It's really great for direct seeded, small seeded crops, right? Because you're protecting those seeds, they'll germinate early, but it's not going to last the whole season to protect your root crop at the end of the season. So you really want to make sure you're integrating those different cultural controls as well as using Symegra.
Exactly. There is also Taraxa, which is is basically the same. It's the same active ingredient, only on the small seeds, so on grain or something like that. We're going to do a trial in AIM this year. We wanted to do it this past year, and the year conspired against us in terms of weather and stuff. But we're going to do a side-by-side comparison of putting that broflanilide chemical on through Taraxa in the fall on a cover crop versus putting it on in the potatoes in the potato year, and seeing if we see any difference in wireworm control. You can skip that one. That's all old news. Increasing yields, we've talked about this a few times. I've shared some of this with you a few times. Just go to the next slide, please, Hamna. So in the last Living Labs, where we had a cover ahead of potatoes versus no cover ahead of potatoes, we saw about a 30 hundredweight yield improvement, or about a 10% yield improvement, where we had a cover versus no cover. And in a system where you're getting that cover established early. So I have to say that, like, it is getting a cover established August, September, not October, okay? So getting a good big biomass going into the winter. And why? I think in part because it's carrying over some nitrogen. I think it's helping to foster and feed the soil microbes. I think it's soil erosion. I think there's multiple things beside it. Maybe a bit on like soil structure, that sort of thing. Just go to the next slide, please, Hamna. So that's all the trials we did in the Living Labs. I just put into a plus or minus on the graph here. And you can see there's a lot more above zero than below zero. The ones in green are a cereal, so oats, barley, wheat. The ones below or the ones that are red are radish or mustard. And the ones that are orange, so there's only two orange ones, those are a mix. So that's where it was like a brassica grain mix. Most of the ones, just go back please, most of the ones that are below were actually radish, but there's also lots of radish ones that were above as well. But on average, you know, we're in that sort of 30 range on that. And the win rate, if you say all these trials, what's the win rate, is about 85%, which is pretty good. Next slide, please. So if you're trying to decide what you want to do for a cover crop option, there's things to consider in that. So it's what crop am I following? What crop am I planning into next? What's my window for establishment? What's my available equipment? And what's the cost? And those all play a really big role in what you're going to choose to do. So we're talking early. We're talking after grain or after early terminated forage. After peas, after mustard, that sort of stuff. You've got lots of options. So you've got your brassicas, you've got oilseed and daikon radish. Daikon radish is tillage radish here. You've got your mustards, you've got all your spring cereals, you've got winter canola, which not many people are growing here, but has been shown to grow here and grow well if planted early. You've got winter barley, which if planted early here has been successful, but you have to plant it early. You can't plant it when you plant winter wheat. You have to plant it 2 weeks before when you plant winter wheat. Peas can be a good cover. I've had it in a couple trials. It can make a really great cover if you plant it in August or early September, or mixes of these. This one picture on the bottom here, it's a little harder to tell because of the glare here, but the left-hand side was just tillage radish, and the right-hand side was radish and oats. And you can kind of see the right-hand side just a little bit more full, a little bit more consistent coverage. There's where the benefit of a mixture is, right? The radish is great for, you know, covering the ground and getting those broad leaves and that sort of stuff, but where there's a hole or where you don't get the germination or something, then you could have a spot where there's no coverage, right? Because it's at a fairly low seeding rate. That's where then the benefit of the other grass that comes in, the oats, filling in the holes and that sort of thing, you know, you get more total biomass. Once we get into September, early October, so after about the 10th of September, generally we don't have enough runway for tillage radish, so and oilseed radish. So generally, like if it's after the first week of September, I usually say either keep it in the bag for now or make sure you have something else in the mix in case it fails. Your spring cereals are still fine. They'll still get enough runway to make a mat before Christmas, before the snow. And then your winter cereals start coming into their own. So your winter wheat, some people argue, well, winter wheat's not a cover crop because you're growing it to get a crop. Agreed. It's not a non-commercial cover crop. But you're accomplishing the same thing. So if you can get the benefit of having the ground covered and harvest a crop off of it, then that's fantastic. Then if you could fit that in your rotation, I would do that. Not every field is the right fit for that. Not every rotation is the right fit for that. But where you can make that work, great. Same for the winter barley. I would say PEI, after the 15th of September, I wouldn't bother trying to plant winter barley most of the time. And then winter triticale, that's a hybrid of rye and wheat. We're starting to see a bit of triticale. Some of the dairy guys are planting it now after corn silage, and then makes a nice cover, and then they can bale it off or graze it off in the spring for like early forage, that sort of thing. Maybe after early season potatoes, you could do the same thing, especially if you were going into corn the next year or soybeans or something else. And then fall rye. Fall rye is the queen of cover crops. Fall rye is, if you go to the next slide, is the most consistent late establisher. It can still grow in 5-degree soil. It'll stay green all winter. I took this picture last week in Freetown, and like that's fall rye, and it just looks beautiful, like just beautiful. And there's all sorts of water infiltration going in there. There's no water running over that field. There's no erosion in those big sweepy fields. Even compared to the headland, there's ice, and on the compacted headland, you go out in that field, it's all just soaking in, right? And it's going to stay green like that all winter, and then it's going to go into active growth in April. So where you have the opportunity, great. I said this to the groups yesterday. I'm really proud of everybody for the amount of cover cropping that's been going on. This year, more than ever, and I'm going to show that and show the stats on that in a second. But like, something is better than nothing. So if the something is barley and oats after potatoes, that's better than nothing. That's better for holding the soil and having something on there to keep the soil from moving and that sort of thing. However, if you're looking at especially on fields that have some slope, fields that you want to build organic matter on, that you're struggling fields, switching more of those annual covers to these winter cereals that are going to last the winter and are going to hold the soil all winter and are going to last into the spring and regrow in the spring, that's what's going to build organic matter. That's what's going to help with compaction. That's what's going to help with nitrogen retention. That's the next level. And then you also, like things like winter rye, you get weed suppression. So there's some other benefits to that. Now, is there provisos with that? Yes. If you got a really wet field, I wouldn't put rye on it because you're not going to be able to get on it early enough to kill it in the spring if you're not going to let it go out to seed and harvest it. So I would go more with like a triticale or a winter wheat or something that you can kill easier, that sort of thing. try and kill it. If you're going to spray it off, make sure you do it when before it's gone to head, because then you're going to get a better kill on it, right? If you're going to mow it, wait until it kind of starts going to head. Wait until it starts going to seed, and then it's not going to regrow. So now you've got, depending on how you're going to terminate it, you've got different options. Next slide, please, Hamna. So this is the data from the fall cover crop survey. So again, this is extrapolated over like 50 responses that represented about 33% of the acres in the island. So then I extrapolate that out. But if you look at it, back in 2019, the blue bar is after potato covers and the red bar is before. And you can see we were about 37% of our acres after potatoes and about 24% before. And now, the number before potatoes has gotten up as high as 60 there a couple of years ago. Now it's down the last couple of years. I think a big reason it's down the last couple of years is because people that wanted to get covers planted in September couldn't get them to grow because it was too dry, or couldn't even get the plow in the ground or whatever. So I think that took the numbers down on that a little bit. But look at the numbers on after potatoes. We shot up to about 50 there and then stayed around 50 for a couple of years and then up to 60 and now we're up to 70. Again, that's tremendous. You're all to be commended for that, for those that are doing it. The more of it, the better. It's better for you and it's better for our neighbors and it's better for the visibility of our industry and it is better for your fields. The only thing I will say is, after we lost all the snow at Christmas and we got that warm up and then you drive around, a bunch of those fields that were green in November ain't green no more because all that oats that only got about this tall or the barley that got about this tall is all dead. And so again, it's better than nothing. The roots it made are holding the soil better than if there was nothing. But the more that we can put it into winter cereals, the better. And I understand if you're going to grow barley after potatoes, putting rye on doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you're not growing barley after potatoes and you're growing, corn, or you're growing beans, or you're growing multi-species mixes, or you're growing alfalfa direct seeded, that could be a place where it fits. So just bear that in mind. Next slide. Another thing I kind of teased out of the numbers was, covers after potatoes, well, that doesn't take a whole lot of gear and that doesn't take a whole lot of precision, and most people are doing it regardless of their farm size, so that was great. But on the acres with covers before potatoes, most of the people that are doing that are, of course, you got the seeder box on, you got the APV seeder on the tillage, on the res till or on the lemkin or whatever, and you're doing it in one pass and it's great and it works super. If you're only growing a smaller acreage and you don't have a 275 horsepower tractor, or you don't have a lemkin or a synchro or that sort of thing, then that is a little bit of a technology barrier to that. And that's why I think those numbers are a little lower on the smaller farms. So that's why we have the discussion about, okay, what are the other options? Is it spinning on something after plowing and running a roller over it? Or is it, what are the options? What are people interested in doing? Maybe it's, I have the tillage machine, but I don't have the tractor. Can I rent the tractor? For the purposes of doing that tillage and getting my cover on. I know a lot of people here aren't big on renting or sharing machinery, and I know from a biosecurity side, we're really not big on sharing some machinery, so I understand that for sure. But let's look at the options. And also, it could be for some farms, maybe it's I want to have more covers and I want to have less tillage. Well, maybe that means I do less of the sod forming crops. I do less of the clover, alfalfa, grass, and I do more of, something that's going to be a little easier to work. Just looking at the options. So, where do we go on next on fall covers? As an industry, you're doing a great job. You're ahead of almost everywhere else in North America with your use of fall covers. How do we keep that going in a post-off-calf world, potentially, where you're not getting $75 an acre to do cover crops? What are the barriers to increasing acreage of winter cereals instead of spring cereals? How do we deal with years like this, when in late August, early September, all these people wanted to go out and work ground and couldn't because it was too dry? Do you just manage that on a year-by-year basis, or do we come up with contingencies or come up with workarounds for that? What have you learned about how to better manage your covers, whether that's fall covers or full season covers? What are the things that you've done that are working for you, or what are the things you've done that you say, well, that didn't work, and don't do that anymore? You know, we can learn from each other. You guys, I went to a really good conference in Ontario back in October, and they talked about how farmers adopt BMPs, how farmers adopt new knowledge. And the number one, they asked farmers, what is the information source that is that would be most likely to have you adopt the BMP? And it wasn't listening to this guy, it wasn't listening to an agronomist, and it wasn't listening to Ag Canada, and it wasn't listening to social media, and it wasn't listening to the person that sells you fertilizer, and it wasn't listening to all those other people in the world. It was other farmers. It was peers. So anything we can do to foster you guys learning from each other, if you're willing to share and willing to listen, that generally is associated with better outcomes for everybody. So anything we can do to foster that, we're going to do, okay? And if you feel like sharing that sort of stuff, please feel free to do so. Before I move on to that, our next thing, does anybody have any other questions, comments, thoughts around cover crops or rotation? I have 2 more things to get us to the end, and then we're done.
Ryan, one question. You gave us a lot of options here, and I'm just wondering if there anybody in the room that has had great success with multi-species mixes or single that they'd be willing to share with the group?
Yep. Has anybody made a change in their rotation that they're really happy with and that you think has come ahead with, or anybody have anything they're willing to share? Maybe not. Or we're fumbling around trying to find the right answer, like everybody, right?